Alright, so it's been a while since I've gone on a little bit of an art ramble on one of my designs or paintings that I've created. And this one's from a while ago, and I'm actually quite fond of the way it turned out. And it's kind of funny how the idea came to be. So, it's no secret that I am pretty into fantasy art, into the themes of fantasy. I think fantasy has just so much cool elements to offer and just a lot of playfulness in the subjects that you can actually use to create maybe new and unique things. Obviously, it's been pretty established the way certain fantastical characters are supposed to look like. Like, for example, I'm drawing a goblin now, and I did give him a big nose, sharp teeth, and pointy ears. But even within those constraints, you can still think about, okay, how can I now provide a unique twist to this that might make my art or my version of this kind of species stand out a little bit more. The first obvious thing that you might notice is he has 4 legs. That's not an accident. I didn't accidentally grow 2 extra legs. Actually, I just came up with the idea of, okay, what if I turn this into a centaur, and what if the centaur is not horse but rat? So suddenly, already by introducing a rat body in there and trying to make that fit together, I've ended up creating hopefully a more unique combination of features that at least I haven't ever seen before, which would make this character stand out a little bit more as well. So that's the obvious feature that I used to maybe come up with a more unique idea for something that had already been done before. Now, aside from obviously the rat body that would help this guy stand out, there's other ways to make maybe more standard subjects stand out. Because the way I see it, you can do a standard object in a unique way, or you can do a unique object in a standard way, and both will be successful ways to create like your own version of something that will still feel recognizable and unique. So goblins, again, we know what they look like. We don't necessarily know what they look like with the shape language that I tend to prefer, which is, again, these very sharp corners and harsh edges and maybe the broken curves that I've mentioned in previous videos. So I think that already helps me create a bit more of a unique take on the goblin species, right? Again, a unique approach to a standard design will still deliver a unique result. Some other people might go about it the opposite way. They might do just realism, and rather than the style being unique in that sense, the subject would have to be unique for that to stand out. So combining the two obviously will bring you closer to, like, at least bring your piece closer to success when it comes to that unique feature. And I think I got pretty close with this character. Aside from all of that I've just talked about, this character was just very, very fun for me to actually play around with, trying to ground it a little bit more in reality than I usually do. Personally, and this is one of the mistakes that I've made in the past, I haven't necessarily done enough studies on how things are actually usually put together, how things make sense, basically. Because I'm a fairly intuitive artist. I tend to use my intuition to create unique designs, and I tend to use my intuition and my just kind of sense of logic to put things together in a way that at least feels believable enough. But especially when you're trying to do like armor and stuff and clothes and leatherwork, etc., and weaponry, it's good to go that extra step and actually think about, okay, how can I actually know more about how this is put together? So for example, stuff like, how do I attach a pouch to a belt? What kind of layering of armor would actually make sense? Which fabrics would be accessible and how would they be put together? Like, I didn't necessarily think about them really hard, but I at the very least did some studies beforehand, tried to turn it into something that is believable, not realistic. A lot of people tend to struggle with that distinction. We as artists are interpreting reality, which means we are aiming for a version of our own that is believable to the viewer. The viewer needs to believe that it might work, that it might make sense. It doesn't have to be historically accurate, it doesn't have to be realistic, It's possible that the armor would fall apart if I would try to build it in real life. Heck, that's why cosplayers have so much difficulty building their cosplay based on video game characters, because most of the time they don't make sense when you look at it from a realistic standpoint. So believability would be key in this case. And that's what I'm aiming for here, believability. Maybe some fun quirks, like for example having the bolts be stuck in the sleeve. I think that's kind of a fun feature. Maybe they kept falling out of his pouch that is hanging in a very illogical place, so it could be a storytelling element why the pouch is over there and why it's empty. And maybe he stuck the final bolts that he had into his sleeve for safekeeping or whatever. Not the most logical solution, but again, if it's believable, I feel like I've been successful. A very fun thing to do when I'm working with these kind of character portraits, or well, it's not a portrait I suppose, but these kind of character illustrations, I really like playing around with a lot of different colors and specifically temperature shifts. So we can see very clearly with this character what I wanted to do is I wanted to have a very clear distinction between the warm light and the cool environmental light, the cool ambient light. And I'm trying to do my best to use those colorful shapes to also paint away the line art that is underneath. If people want to see a video on specifically how I go from line art to a painting, by the way, I suppose I could make a video on that if that interests people. But for the most part, the process is kind of simple. I just put a new layer on top and start painting the line art away. Not all of it, because I do like to keep some of the line art in there in areas where I think it definitely helps accentuating or emphasizing my design in ways that I would want to maintain, right? Because whenever we're creating something, it needs to be mostly something, partially something else. So in this case, it will end up being mostly a painting with some lines in tactical areas to accentuate the more recognizable features. Just like it is mostly dark with some light in this case. It is mostly neutral with a little bit of color, with a little bit of saturation. So those are the ideas that go through my mind as I'm working on a design like this, as I'm working on a painting. Like that hierarchy, that ratio, that is the most crucial information, I think, the most crucial theory in anything design related, in anything art related, because it really applies to everything. Mostly sharp shapes, somewhat rounded shapes, mostly organic, somewhat inorganic, mostly rat, somewhat goblin, or the other way around, and so on and so on. So do keep in mind the hierarchy matters. We need to make sure that it's very clear to see what is the most important feature, what is the second most important feature, and whatever else is down the list should also, again, be very clear in that hierarchy of how important some things are. So for the most part, this design process was fairly simple. I started with a unique idea. I tried to draw my unique idea in a unique way. I used my research to ground some of the costume features in reality at least a little bit more so that they become believable. And then I use my light to emphasize the form and try to paint away the colors. Obviously these are very broad steps, but the fun thing is, like, this process is kind of how I approach any design that I make. So it's always going to be the same steps. You might have seen in some of the other character videos as well, where I basically have the same workflow. I do my sketch, I do my more detailed line art where I try to separate materials, then I add in my flat colors, then I add in my light and dark information, and then I paint everything away with just, a normal layer like what I'm doing right now. And usually that works out pretty well for me. Like, I'm pretty happy with that specific workflow. Sometimes, depending on the scene, I might choose a different workflow. I might take a bit more of a painterly approach right from the start. Might start a bit more colorful. Again, depends on the situation. Like, for example, this character was mostly in shadow, had a little bit of light on top of him. Therefore, to me it made sense to darken everything first and then paint the light in rather than paint the shadows in, because that would be much more work than painting the small light shapes on top of a dark shape. So there's a bit of common sense that goes with determining a workflow, and that's why I'm usually hesitant on really going in depth on the kind of workflow that I tend to use, because I don't necessarily think that's something that you should take from a different artist. You can get inspired by certain approaches, but try to just mess around and figure out for yourself what works and what doesn't work. Like, experience is really the best teacher in that sense. I believe even Craig Mullins said at some point, and I might be mistaken here, but that a workflow is the death of creativity, because for the moment you kind of get stuck into a certain workflow, in a certain way of doing things, you stop experimenting, you stop exploring new methods, and therefore you will refine that current skill to the point where it can't be refined anymore. And whenever people feel like they are plateauing, I think it's that limitation, it's that point in your career, in your artistic development, where you have run out of curiosity and you have been basically accepted your workflow, you're satisfied with what you're doing, and therefore you don't venture into the unknown anymore, you don't do the experimentation that brings you all of these kind of new approaches and new ideas, because people tend to be scared of experimenting because an experiment might fail. And a lot of students tend to get so stuck into one particular way of doing things because they know, oh yeah, this I can bring to a reasonable success. This works quite well, I'll just keep doing this. And then when I try to push them and say like, oh yeah, how about you try this new approach? It might be fun, might suit you well. They try it once, doesn't work, and they think, no, I'm not gonna do it anymore. The thing to realize is it's kind of impossible to expect that something will be perfect right from the start. And that's the whole point of an experiment. You're trying to try new things that could potentially work in the future. An experiment doesn't have to be successful right from the start. So try a few new things, few new approaches, mix the order in which you do things. Like, I could just as well started with just a splotch of color and then drawn some line art on top in the areas where I needed it, and I might have gotten the same result, who knows. Maybe it would have saved me some time, because now in this case I had a fairly refined line art when almost nothing of the line art still remains. I mean, to be fair, it was a very good template that I could follow as I was adding my color on top and my lighting information, because I knew exactly where my brush strokes would have to go. So the line art was actually serving sort of like a blueprint, and the more detailed that blueprint, the more structured that painting process would also have to be. So it makes sense, and in this case it was successful. I quite like the way this character ended up looking. One of the main reasons he's working so well is again those ratios, the little bit of light in the mostly dark character. And so overall just a fun experiment. I might do more of these amalgamations of creatures. Maybe next time I'll do like an elf and something else, centaur. So feel free to make some suggestions on what combinations of fantasy races or creatures you think would be interesting to try to create. I'd be happy to hear what your ideas are on that end. Because again, experimentation. It's just a lot of fun to figure out new ways of creating interesting art pieces. And you know, if you run out of inspiration for them, it's helpful if you have an audience that you can ask for questions. So yeah, feel free to leave a comment. I hope you found this video interesting. Just a little bit of an art ramble. So no subject in particular that I wanted to bring up here. I just kind of liked the design here, and thought you guys might find it interesting. If there's anything in particular you'd like me to do, again, leave a suggestion. I'd happily do so. But for now, enjoy the rest of the video, and I'll see you again in a future video. Take care.